The dining room at Cordell went silent the way a struck bell goes silent, all at once, and then not at all, the sound of it still hanging in the air after the noise had stopped. It was a Thursday, the slow night, and the front of the house held maybe 40 people over white linen and low gold light. Marcus Bell stood at the pass in his stained whites with a plate of seared duck in each hand, and the man who owned the building, the man whose name was painted in script on the front window, was telling him to get out. Not later. Not at the end of service. Now. The owner's finger was up and pointing, the way a man points when he has decided the pointing is the punishment. The line cooks had stopped moving. A server stood frozen with a tray against her hip, and Marcus, who had not raised his voice in that kitchen in 4 years, set both plates down on the steel with a care that made the silence worse, untied his apron, and folded it once. What the owner did not know yet was that there was a letter in the office, open that afternoon, sitting under a stack of invoices on the desk. What that letter said would empty the colour from his face in less than an hour. But before we get to that letter, before we get to the moment the owner read his own ruin in a single embossed paragraph, you need to understand who Marcus Bell was and how a man that good ended up invisible in his own kitchen. Let me take you back. Marcus grew up on the east side of a city that doesn't need naming, in an apartment over a laundromat where the floor was always warm and always smelled faintly of bleach and dryer sheets. His grandmother raised him. Her name was Odessa, and she cooked for other people's families 6 days a week in houses she was never invited to sit down in, and she came home every night and cooked again. For him, because she said a person should eat at least one meal a day that was made by someone who loved them. She kept a cast-iron skillet that had belonged to her own mother, black as a river stone, smooth as glass on the cooking surface, heavy enough that a boy needed 2 hands. She would not let it touch soap. She wiped it with salt and a rag and a film of oil, and she told Marcus that the pan remembered every good thing it had ever cooked, and that was why nothing stuck to it anymore. He was 7 when she first put it in his hands. He was 9 when she let him use it alone. She taught him things that had no recipe. How to listen to onions, how a thing browning sounds different right before it burns, a small change in the hiss, a warning you could only hear if you had been quiet long enough to learn it, how to taste a sauce and know what it was missing, not by name, but by absence, the way you know a room is missing a chair. She never wrote anything down. She said writing it down was for people who were afraid of forgetting, and you did not forget what you loved. When she could no longer stand at the stove, Marcus cooked for her. He was 16. He made the things she had made, and she would close her eyes and chew slowly and tell him, "Not bad, a little more time on the heat. You pulled it early because you were nervous." She was almost always right. The last full meal she ate from a plate he had made, and she held his wrist with a hand gone light as paper and told him the thing he carried into every kitchen for the rest of his life. "Cook so that nobody can put you out of the room," she said. "Make food so good they have to keep you. That is the only key that fits every door." She died in the autumn. He kept the skillet. He carried it from apartment to apartment in a canvas bag, wrapped in a dish towel, and he never once let it touch soap. Marcus did not go to culinary school. There was no money for it, and there was a younger cousin who needed the rent covered, and there was the simple fact that the kitchens that would teach you for free were the kitchens that would also use you up. He started washing dishes at 19. He worked the fryer, he worked garde-manger, the cold station nobody respects, and he made the cold station beautiful. Terrines layered like geology, vegetables cut so clean they looked machined. He read every cookbook the public library would lend him, and many it would not, because he learned to renew them online forever. He bought knives one at a time over years. He learned French technique from books and then unlearned the parts of it that his grandmother had already taught him better. He could break down a whole animal. He could make 5 mother sauces in his sleep, and 3 he had invented that had no mother at all. By the time he was 30, he had cooked in 7 kitchens, and in every one of them he had been the best cook on the line and the last one promoted. Here is what you need to understand about a kitchen. It is the most honest room in any building and the most unjust at the same time. The food doesn't lie. The food tells you exactly who can cook. But the people who decide who gets the title, who gets the magazine quote, who gets to stand at the pass and call the shots, those people are reading something other than the food. They are reading your name, your school, your accent, the part of town your shoes came from. Marcus came to Caudle 4 years before that Thursday night. He came as a line cook, and within 18 months he was running the kitchen in everything but name. The man who owned it, whose name was on the window, did not cook. He had inherited money and bought a restaurant the way other men buy a boat because it was a thing a certain kind of man was supposed to have. His name was Whitfield Crane, and he liked to walk the dining room in a good jacket and accept compliments for food he could not have made if his life depended on it. There was a head chef on paper. His name was Dominic, a loud man with good hair and a culinary school ring he turned on his finger when he was nervous, which was often. Dominic ran the kitchen the way a weak king runs a country, by taking credit for the harvest and blaming the weather. The dishes that drew the reviews were Marcus's dishes. The plating that made the photographs were Marcus's hands. Dominic would taste a sauce Marcus had built, nod, and carry the plate to the pass as though he had dreamed it. Marcus let him. Not because he was weak, because he was building something, and he had learned from his grandmother that the building is done in silence, and you don't announce the foundation while you are still pouring it. Let me paint the full picture for you. 3 years into his time at Caudle, Marcus started cooking on his nights off. Not at home. At a church basement on the east side near where he grew up, where a woman named Pearl ran a free supper twice a week for anyone who walked in. Pearl was past 70, broad and slow-moving, with a voice that could fill the room without rising. She had been feeding that neighbourhood out of that basement for 30 years, off donations and her own pension, and a faith that the food would stretch, and somehow it always had. Marcus came with crates of the produce Caudle would have thrown out, bruised heirloom tomatoes, herbs gone slightly leggy, fish that was one day from the edge, mushrooms with soft spots he could cut around. He made those people food that the people at Caudle paid $200 a head to eat. He set up a single propane burner on a folding table and worked it like a 4-burner range, and the line that formed was not the line of people taking charity. It was the line of people who had learned that on Tuesday and Thursday a man downtown came east and cooked like the food was the most important thing in the world, and they were the most important people to give it to. Word travels in ways that titles cannot stop. A food writer named Helen, who had grown up 2 blocks from that church and still had family there, came to the supper one Tuesday to visit her aunt. She had not planned to eat. She ended up with a bowl of something Marcus had made out of nearly nothing, white beans and the last of a fish, and a broth he had built from bones and trim. And she took 1 spoonful and stopped talking mid-sentence to her aunt. She did not know who he was. She watched him work the burner with a towel over his shoulder, calling out to people by name, sending a child back to the table with an extra portion folded into a napkin. She asked Pearl. Pearl said, "That's just Marcus. He cooks somewhere fancy downtown, but he comes here on his off nights, never misses one, never takes a dime." Helen watched the way the room loved him, the way the hardest faces in the line softened when they reached the front of it. She said nothing, but she did not forget, and a food writer who does not forget is a dangerous thing for a man who has been hidden on purpose. This is the moment from the beginning of the story. Though you cannot see it yet. A seed was planted in a church basement that would, much later, walk into a restaurant downtown and pull every wall down at once. Back at Caudle, the humiliations were small at first, the way they always are. Whitfield Crane had a habit of correcting Marcus in front of the staff over things that were not wrong. He would taste a dish and declare it underseasoned, when it was seasoned exactly to the edge, a professional palate wants. And Marcus would add salt he did not need to add, and the dish would go out slightly worse. And the customer would never know they had eaten the lesser version of something because a man who could not cook needed to feel like he could. Crane called him by the wrong name for the first 6 months on purpose, Marcus was almost sure. The way certain men keep getting your name wrong as a way of telling you that your name is not worth the trouble of learning. He would introduce Dominic to important guests as my chef, my genius, and he would gesture at Marcus the way you gesture at a piece of equipment. That one, he's been with us a while. Marcus absorbed it. He went home to the apartment where the cast-iron skillet hung on the wall, and some nights he took it down and held it, just held it, the weight of it in his hands like a hand holding back, and he heard his grandmother's voice. Make food so good they have to keep you. He kept cooking. He kept building. The crisis began on a Tuesday, 2 days before the night the dining room went silent. A man came to dinner at Caudle alone, which is rare in a room built for couples and celebrations. He was older, grey at the temples, in a jacket that was good but not new, the kind of jacket worn by a man who no longer needed to impress anyone. He sat at a small table near the kitchen and asked for the seat that faced the pass, which the host found odd because most guests want to face the room, not the work. He ordered the tasting menu and he ate it slowly. Between courses, he closed his eyes for a moment after the first bite of each plate, the way a man listens to a piece of music he half recognizes. When the duck came, he set his fork down after one bite and did not pick it up again for a full minute, just looking at the plate. Then he ate the rest of it without speaking. He asked the server quiet questions. Who had made this? Where had the technique come from? Was the chef classically trained? And if so, where? The server, who only knew what she had been told, said the chef was Dominic, culinary school in the city, very celebrated, been written up twice. The man wrote something in a small notebook with a pencil in a hand too small to read from across a table. He did not order dessert. He paid in cash and tipped well. And on his way out, he stopped at the host stand and left a card and asked, in a low voice, that it be given to whoever had actually cooked the meal, with a small weight on the word actually that the host did not understand and would not remember until much later. The host, not knowing what to do with a request that strange, put the card in the office on the desk under the stack of invoices, where it sat for 2 days untouched, while the man who should have read it, cooked 40 more dinners without knowing his name, had already been carried out of the building in a stranger's notebook. What you need to understand is that this man was not an ordinary guest. He was on the regional committee of the James Beard Foundation, the body that gives the most important award in American food, and he had come to Caudle because of a nomination letter, submitted months earlier by a food writer named Helen, who had eaten a bowl of soup in a church basement and never forgotten the man who made it. She had done the work in silence too. She had tracked Marcus down, learned where he worked, and put his name forward, attaching to it a written account of a free supper on the east side and the cook who turned scraps into something that made grown people weep. The committee does not take such things on faith. They send someone to eat. The man with the notebook was that someone. And he had eaten Marcus's food, every course of it, and credited it in his notebook to a man named Dominic, because that is who the restaurant said had cooked it. The award letter arrived at Caudle on Thursday afternoon, addressed to the chef. Whitfield Crane opened it himself in the office because Crane opened everything addressed to the restaurant, and he read the first paragraph, and what he read was that the James Beard Foundation was pleased to inform the recipient that he had been named, that his work had been recognised, that an account of a free community supper had moved the committee as much as the meal at the restaurant itself. The letter named the recipient. The letter named Marcus Bell. Crane read the name. He did not understand it at first. He read it again. And then he did a thing that men who are afraid do, which is that he decided the problem was the man and not the truth. Because if Marcus Bell had been nominated, then everything Crane had told the world about his restaurant, every introduction of Dominic as my genius, every dish he had taken to a guest's table as though he had thought of it, every word of it was a lie that was now in writing on letterhead in the hands of the most important food organisation in the country. He put the letter face down on the desk. He walked out to the kitchen. And he found a reason, a small, invented reason, about a delivery that had gone wrong, a reason that everyone in the kitchen knew was not real. And he told Marcus Bell to take his apron off and get out of his restaurant. Now you are back at the beginning. Now you are standing in the silent dining room, and the apron is folded once on the steel, and the duck is going cold. And Whitfield Crane is pointing with the finger of a man who believes that pointing is the same as winning. Marcus did not argue. He had never once argued with Crane during a humiliation, because his grandmother had taught him that you do not wrestle with a man over whether the floor is clean while you are still standing in his house. You leave the house. You let the floor tell on itself. He took the canvas bag from the hook by the office. Inside it, wrapped in a dish towel, was the skillet. He had brought it that morning to season it during prep, a thing he did sometimes, a private ritual nobody asked about. He lifted the bag. It was heavier than its size, the way the truest things always are. Dominic stood at the pass with his ring turning on his finger and said nothing. The line cooks looked at their stations. One of them, a young woman named Rosa, who had started 3 months earlier and whom Marcus had taught to break down a fish without wasting a gram, opened her mouth and then closed it because she was new and she was afraid. and Marcus caught her eye and gave her the smallest shake of his head. "Not your fight," the look said. "Not yet. Stay, learn, keep your job." He walked out through the dining room because the kitchen door was blocked by Crane and he would not ask the man to move. 40 people watched a black man in stained whites carry a canvas bag past their tables. Some of them looked away. A couple near the window did not, and the woman, who had eaten the duck and called it the best thing she had ever put in her mouth, watched him go with a confusion on her face that she would not be able to name until she read the news 3 weeks later. Marcus pushed the front door open. The bell over it rang. The cold came in, and he stepped out onto the sidewalk under the script of another man's name and stood there for a moment, just breathing, the bag heavy in his hand, 4 years of his life behind a pane of glass. Here is what Whitfield Crane did next, and here is where a frightened man becomes the author of his own ruin. He went back into the office to calm down, and he picked up the letter again because some part of him hoped he had read it wrong. He had not read it wrong. He read it slowly this time, all of it, every paragraph, and the colour went out of his face the way wine goes out of a glass that has tipped over all at once, leaving the shape of where it had been. The letter did not only name Marcus, it named the restaurant. It thanked Cudell for being the professional home of a chef of such rare gift. It said that a representative had dined recently and confirmed the quality of the work. It expressed the Foundation's hope that the restaurant was proud of the talent it had nurtured, and it requested confirmation of the chef's current employment for the programme of the awards ceremony, which would be attended by every food writer of consequence in the region, including, the letter noted, a feature already in progress at a major publication, written by the journalist who had submitted the original nomination, a feature already in progress. About a chef Crane had fired 40 minutes earlier in front of his entire dining room for a delivery problem that had not happened. Crane sat down in the chair. He understood, the way you understand a sound in the dark, that he had just done the one thing that could not be undone in front of the one audience that could not be paid off. The journalist was already writing. The Foundation was already certain. And the chef was already gone, fired, witnessed, and the only thing left to decide was how the story of that firing would be told, and Crane no longer held the pen. He tried, that night, to fix it. He called Marcus's phone. Marcus did not answer. He texted a long message about a misunderstanding, about pressures, about how valued Marcus truly was. "Please call." Marcus read it standing in his kitchen at home with the skillet hung back on the wall, and he did not reply because his grandmother had taught him that when a man only finds your worth after he learns its price, the worth he found was never yours. It was the price he was afraid of. Let me tell you about the 3 weeks between the firing and the ceremony, because the story does not jump from the wound to the vindication. The space between is where the meaning lives. Helen, the journalist, called Marcus 2 days after the firing. She had heard from Rosa, who had found her on the internet, and written her a careful message at midnight that Marcus had been put out of Caudle on the very afternoon the letter arrived. Helen already knew the rest because Helen had built the rest. She called Marcus and told him who she was, and that she was the one who had eaten his soup in Pearl's basement, and that she had put his name forward, and that she was sorry it had cost him his job, and that she was going to make sure the cost ran the other direction now. Marcus was quiet on the phone for a long time. Then he asked her one question. He asked whether the people at Pearl's supper would be mentioned, whether the story would be about a fancy restaurant or about a church basement, because he didn't want the basement turned into a sad detail that made the restaurant look generous. Helen understood exactly what he was asking. She told him the story would begin in the basement and end wherever he wanted it to end. He told her it should end wherever the food ended up feeding the most people. She wrote that down. In those 3 weeks, 2 things happened that mattered. The first was that Rosa, the young cook, quietly told the other line cooks what she had seen, and one by one, in the way that water finds the cracks, they began to look for other jobs because a kitchen is held together by respect for the person at the pass. And the person at the pass had been walked out the front door for telling the truth with his cooking. Dominic, left with a kitchen that no longer believed in him, started turning out food that the regulars noticed had changed. A man at table 6 sent back a sauce. A regular couple did not return. The reviews, when they came, used the word inconsistent, which is the most dangerous word a restaurant can earn. The second thing was that Marcus cooked, not for Crane, for Pearl. He went to the church basement every night it was open, and then he started opening it on nights it had never been open. and the line out the door grew until it bent around the corner of the building. Helen wrote about that line. She wrote about a chef of national recognition standing over a propane burner in a basement, feeding people who had never paid for a meal in their lives the same food a committee had flown someone in to taste. The award ceremony was held in the grand ballroom of a hotel downtown, 20 blocks and an entire world from the church basement. Marcus wore a suit Pearl had helped him buy, the only suit he owned, dark and plain and correct. He did not change out of who he was to attend. He carried in the inside pocket of the jacket a small thing wrapped in a square of the same dish towel he wrapped the skillet in, because he could not bring the skillet itself, but he could bring a piece of his grandmother into the room. It was a single cast iron handle, old, broken off a smaller pan years ago that he had kept the way some people keep a photograph. Whitfield Crane was at the ceremony. Of course he was. He had bought a table months earlier before any of this, the way a man who collects restaurants buys a table at the award show to be seen. He sat at that table now in a tuxedo with Dominic beside him, both of them having decided that the only way through was to show up and smile and let the room assume that Caudle was proud, that Caudle had nurtured this talent, that the firing had been, as Crane was telling anyone who asked, a clerical mess long since resolved. The room did not know yet that it had not been resolved. The room did not know that the chef being honoured had been walked out the front door of the very restaurant whose owner now sat applauding at table 11. But Helen knew. Helen had the story set in type, embargoed, scheduled to publish the morning after the ceremony. Every word of it confirmed, including the date the letter arrived and the date the firing happened, which were the same date, which was a fact that no jacket and no smile could survive. The awards ran in their order, and then the presenter, a chef of enormous reputation whose own restaurant had 3 of everything, stood at the podium to give the regional award for excellence and read the citation. And the citation began not with Caudle but with a church basement on the east side of the city and a free supper and a man who cooked for people the world had stopped feeding. The room went quiet the way that dining room had gone quiet 3 weeks before, all at once, and then not at all. Heads began to turn. People who had been told one story began to feel a second story arriving underneath it. And the presenter read the chef's name, Marcus Bell, and asked him to come to the stage. And Marcus stood up from a table near the back, in his plain, dark suit, with a broken iron handle in his pocket, and walked to the front of a room full of the most powerful people in American food. He didn't look at table 11. He did not need to. He could feel it the way you feel a cold spot in a warm room. He took the award. He stood at the podium. And here is the thing the profile of his whole life had promised and finally delivered. He did not gloat. He did not name Crane. He did not tell the room he had been fired. Because he did not have to. Because Helen's story would do that at 6 the next morning, and it would do it with dates and quotes and the cold precision of fact. And a man who has been wronged in writing does not need to shout. He needs only to let the writing speak. What Marcus did instead was tell the room about a skillet. He told them about a woman named Odessa who cooked in houses she was never invited to sit down in, and who came home and cooked again for a boy she loved, and who taught him that a pan remembers every good thing it ever cooked. He told them that he had learned everything he knew from a woman with no title, in a kitchen with no name, and that the food did not care where you learned it. The food only cared whether you had been quiet long enough to listen. He held up the broken iron handle. He said it was the only diploma he had ever needed. He said one more thing. He said that the award did not belong to a restaurant, it belonged to a basement, and that he would be using the recognition and whatever came with it to open a place of his own, a place where the cooking would be taught the way his grandmother had taught it, free to anyone who walked in, willing to be quiet and learn. He said the church supper would be the first kitchen of it. He said it would carry his grandmother's name. The room stood up. Not politely, the way a room stands when it has just watched something true happen in front of it. Helen, near the front, was not writing. She had stopped writing. She was watching and her face was wet, and she let it be wet because some moments you do not report, you only witness. At table 11, Whitfield Crane did not stand. He sat in his tuxedo with his hands flat on the white linen, and the colour that had left his face in the office 3 weeks earlier did not come back. Dominic had quietly turned his culinary school ring around so the stone faced his palm, so it could not be seen, which is the closest thing to an admission that a frightened man ever offers. Neither of them clapped. They could not have explained if asked why their hands would not move. Now let me tell you what happened after, because the stone is not the story, the ripples are the story, and the ripples ran for a long time. Helen's piece published at 6 the next morning. It did not editorialise. It laid the dates side by side, the day the letter arrived and the day the chef was fired, and it let the reader do the arithmetic that Crane had hoped no one would ever do. It quoted Rosa, who had given her name, who said simply that the best cook she had ever worked under had been walked out the front door for being too good to hide anymore. It quoted Pearl. It quoted a man who had eaten at the supper for 2 years and had not known, until the morning the story ran, that the quiet man at the burner was the most celebrated chef in the region. Caudle did not survive it, not because anyone burned it down, not because of any lawsuit, but because a restaurant is a promise that the person who cooks your food respects you, and the city learned that the man who owned this one had fired the truth out of fear. The regulars stopped coming. The reservation book thinned and then emptied. Dominic left within the month for a job 2 cities away under a different name on a different window. Crane held on for a season, walking an empty dining room in his good jacket, accepting compliments from no one, and then he closed the doors and took his name off the glass, and the space sat dark with a paper sign in the window for the better part of a year. Here is the part the profile promised, the institutional mirror, and it came without anyone planning it. The owner of the building, a separate man who had only ever leased the space to Crane, read Helen's article like everyone else. He reached out to Marcus through Helen. He offered him the lease on the same room, the same kitchen, the same dining room where Marcus had carried a canvas bag past 40 silent tables at terms a young chef opening his first place could actually meet. Marcus stood in that empty dining room on a grey afternoon, alone, the script of Crane's name already scraped off the front window, leaving a faint ghost of adhesive. He walked back to the kitchen. He stood at the pass where Dominic had taken credit for 4 years of his work. He set the canvas bag down on the steel and took out the skillet and laid it on the flat top in the centre where the heat was most even, and he turned the burner on and watched the old iron begin to tick and warm, and he stayed until the kitchen smelled the way his grandmother's kitchen had smelled, of warm iron and oil and the particular silence of a place that is about to begin, feeding people again. He took the room. He kept the church supper running on the east side, and he made the downtown room its sibling, not its replacement. He hired Rosa as his first cook, and within a year she ran his cold station the way he had once run someone else's. He hung the cast-iron skillet on the wall of the new dining room, where every guest could see it, with no plaque and no explanation, because the people who needed to understand it would ask, and the people who asked were the people he wanted to feed. He named the place after Odessa. The single word of her name went up on the front window in plain letters, no script, no flourish, the name of a woman who had cooked in houses she was never invited to sit in, now painted on the glass of a room she owned in everything but the deed. On the opening night of the new place, Helen came and Pearl came, and a busload of regulars from the basement came in their good clothes and ate at white linen for the first time in their lives. And Marcus stood at the pass in clean whites and cooked for them with the same hands that had cooked for them off a propane burner, and the food was no different. Because the food had never been the thing that changed. The room had changed. The room had finally stopped blocking the door. Late that night, after the last guest had gone, Marcus stood alone in the dining room of the restaurant that carried his grandmother's name. He took the broken iron handle out of his pocket, the one he had carried to the ceremony, and he set it on the windowsill beneath her name where the morning light would find it. Then he went to the wall and lifted the skillet down just to hold it, the weight of it in his 2 hands like a hand holding back, and he stood in the quiet and listened, the way she had taught him to listen, to a room that no longer needed to put him out because he had built the room himself, and his name was the one on the door. Here is what I want you to take from this, and I am speaking to you now, not about Marcus, but about you, wherever you are sitting and whatever room has tried to make you small. The most dangerous lie ever told to a person of talent is that the people with the titles are the people who can see. They are not. They are very often the people who cannot cook, deciding who gets to be called a chef. Your work is the most honest thing in the building. The work does not lie. And there will come a Thursday, a slow night, when the truth you have been building in silence walks itself to the front of the room and stands up. And the people who pointed at you will find that their hands will not move. Do not spend your life trying to be seen by the people holding the wrong eyes. Build the thing. Build it quiet. Build it so good they have to keep you, and if they put you out anyway, build your own door and put your grandmother's name on it. I want to ask you something before you go, and I want you to sit with it honestly. Whose name would you put on the glass? Whose kitchen taught you the thing you carry into every room, the thing no title gave you and no firing can take? Hold on to that name. Cook so that nobody can put you out of the room. And when you have built your own, leave the door open for the next quiet person standing on the sidewalk, holding everything they are in a canvas bag, waiting for one person who will not look away.